Okay.
All right. We
So,
ended last night reading about the second tier.
yeah, we got
And
interrupted by Morphe being freaked out by our
smoke detector.
smoke detector was low battery and beeping, and Morphe started
Yes.
freaking out. We were in the middle of reading about the
Turquoise meme.
turquoise meme, which
So
is
I'm
the
just gonna
second,
start the second one in the second tier,
Okay.
the second meme. So I'll
the
just
highest of all the tiers.
I'll just start turquoise over. So okay, turquoise, holistic. Universal holistic system, holons/waves of integrative energies, unites feeling with knowledge, multiple levels interwoven into one conscious system. Universal order, but in a living conscious fashion, not based on external rules, blue, or group bonds, green. A grand unification, TOE, is possible.
Theory of everything, right?
In theory and in actuality. Sometimes involves the emergence of a new spirituality as a meshwork of all existence. Turquoise thinking uses the entire spiral, sees multiple levels of interaction, detects harmonics, the mystical forces, and the pervasive flow states that permeate any organization. 0.1% of the population, 1% of the power. With less than 2% of the population at second tier thinking and only 0.1% at turquoise, second tier consciousness is relatively rare because it is now the leading edge of collective human evolution. As examples, Beck and Cohen mention items that include Teilhard de Chardin's noosphere, the growth of transpersonal psychology, chaos and complexity theories, integral holistic systems thinking, Gandhi's and Mandela's pluralistic integration, with increases in frequency definitely on the way, and even higher memes still in the offing. Does that mean like still to come about?
Yeah, just don't we don't have. Well, I guess what the presumption is that at some point we will have enough people at a point that is even beyond that will be able to measure it in terms of some sort of cultural population, but we don't see it yet, and we're not sure what it is or what it would look like. I also wanted to say that while he's calling them the second tier people, the leading edge of consciousness evolution, they're not the leading edge of politics.
No. Green is probably, right?
Right. The green is the leading edge of politics because there's just not enough people talking about what Ken Wilber calls second tier thinking, or this kind of integrative way of looking at all tiers as important.
Yeah.
And kind of like, oh yeah, no, the rednecks are okay too. Right? It's like maybe the good old boys aren't like all terrible racists that we need to like eliminate from society, and maybe we shouldn't be on a witch hunt against any like major segment of our population, because it's not a good idea to do that to Christians or Muslims or any kind of group of people. It's just not a good idea.
If anything, it'd be helpful to just try to get or like talk to those people, learn from them, and maybe help them raise up to a new level of thinking.
Yeah, well, I mean, and we have to.
If they're ready, they will.
We have. This is something I know that we'll get into eventually, but we have to allow people to be the way they want to be.
Yeah, as long as they're not hurting people.
If they're not, as long as they're not, yeah, exactly. As long as they're not interfering with other people's lives. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We have to find a way to live in a society where people can stop
coexist.
evolving. Yeah, coexist, and they can just I don't want to evolve any further. It's like, all right, well, maybe we just have people who don't want to think about philosophy. They don't want to think about morals and ethics, and they don't want to think about the grand ramifications of their thoughts and attitudes on a broader populace.
Sure.
Okay, well, that's a lot to ask. And I think that it a lot of times, because we come across as conservative, it goes it goes as kind of unsaid, but I think it does go unsaid a lot of times because we're just not talking about these issues. But like, it's a great thing for people to be able to think about ethics, morals, systems of oppression, the narratives of history, deconstructing those narratives. It's a great thing to live in a society where those ideas, thoughts, investigations, and interrogations are even possible.
Well, where we're like abundant enough, or we're okay enough. I mean, we've always been this, like, we've always kind of enjoyed thinking and thinking outside the box, even when we were poor. But I mean, but even when we were poor, living in this society, we have a certain level of affluence that allows us to spend our free time thinking about these things, you know? Whereas really throughout most of human history, there wasn't enough time. There wasn't time, or, you know what I mean? You were constantly working to survive and to make...
I like to, and I'd like to coin, I don't know if I've coined this phrase or if it's been coined or not, but if it hasn't, I'd like to coin it. The idea is ambient prosperity. Right? There's an ambient level of prosperity in the United States that says you have electricity. You just have it.
Yeah.
Like you do.
Right. Yeah.
Like you can be like,
I mean,
literally,
you have to pay for it, but like
literally homeless, and you can go and find a charging station on the streets in most major cities.
Yeah.
Like you have electricity. And like homeless people have smartphones. Like this is
some of them.
We live in, it's weird.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing.
Yeah.
Like I'm not saying, it's fine to be homeless in America because you have a cell phone. Like that's not it. But that's not it at all. But like there's an ambient prosperity in the in the Western world and in the United States in particular that is
unprecedented. Well,
it's totally unprecedented in human history. It's bizarre.
Yeah.
But like you just have access to stuff.
Yeah.
That is, like the internet. It's like what? How the hell?
Yeah.
What is? You have access. You have access to all human knowledge via the internet.
Yeah.
Right. Like
and
you
even
can just
like 10
find
years ago, when you and I we were still pretty low income, we could still go to the library and use the internet for free, and a lot of people were in those days. Anyways, I should probably continue, but all right, the jump to second tier consciousness. As Beck and Cohen point out, second tier thinking has to emerge in the face of much resistance from first tier thinking. In fact, a version of the postmodern green meme, with its pluralism and relativism, has actively fought the emergence of more integrative and holistic thinking. And yet, did you want to say something about it?
Nope.
And yet, without second-tier thinking, as Graves, Beck, and Cohen point out, humanity is destined to remain victims of a global autoimmune disease where various memes turn on each other in an attempt to establish supremacy. I feel like that's kind of what's going on right now.
Yeah. So basically we've got
blue, orange, and green right now.
Yeah,
right?
right now in the political
mostly
sphere in the U.S. and most of the Western world, we have three major kind of political worldviews. They are the blue meme of law and order, kind of generally in the Western world it's Christian, but it's also kind of more traditional Muslims.
Yeah.
These people are not supportive of, let's say, they're not supportive of gay rights, for example.
Some
it's
of
not
them
that
might be starting to, maybe.
Supportive of versus okay with.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
Like, we live in a society now where it's kind of like, okay, well, most of the blue meme has kind of accepted that they're just not going to be able to do anything about it.
Right.
Because they're out contextualized by the orange and the green.
Sure.
And it's just like, sorry, we've got better arguments. It's just not going to work.
Right.
You can't tell me that, and this is where it's weird. It's like, you can't tell me that like two gay people being married like affects your marriage because they're not in your house. They're not, in your bed.
They're worried about them infecting. They're worried about them affecting their kids and the mindsets of their kids and the education and they're worried. they're worried about it going further than that.
Yes.
They're worried about it like, okay, well, what's next? You know,
Yeah.
is it going to be the
And this
pedophiles
is,
next?
you know, and okay, so like if it's the pedophiles who are actually trying to get into the LGBTQ movements,
yes,
right, as minor attracted people,
Yeah.
MAPS, right, and
Yeah.
they've got their own little pedophile flag and trying to like legitimize themselves as an orientation rather than
Right.
a
as a
as
mental
a-
illness,
as-
maybe, or
as a-
sexual.
a sexual desire
problem.
to victimize children for
Right.
sexual pleasure. I don't know
Right.
what else to call it.
Right.
Like, I don't care. You can't victimize children. They're not
Yeah.
adults. They don't have the ability
And
to
I
consent.
mean, they might not be wrong in
But-
thinking that is like that group of people. While it's a small group.
Who's they?
The
conservatives?
the
The
MAPS.
MAPS.
No, the
Oh, okay.
MAPS. Like the conservatives might not be wrong that the MAPS type people, again, a small group of people, but it's like it seems bigger when you start to see it online, and
Mhm.
these people, you know, if you're in awareness of them, they probably would like to be a part of the LGBTQ.
Oh, yeah,
know?
no, that's legit. They're trying.
Yeah,
Yeah. There's really people
But
who are
I'm
trying
sure
to.
most of the people in the LGBTQ movement would
Yeah.
not like that.
But this goes the the whole thing that Dave Chappelle was talking about.
Yeah.
You know, the idea that it's like this car,
Mhm.
and the Q is like out there like, hey, I want to get in this car.
Oh.
Right, like that. It's like
Yeah.
it's a weird motley crew of people who aren't necessarily exactly
Right.
aligned. You've got lesbians who are like
Yeah.
not necessarily cool with the whole
Well,
trans.
They're not
thing, and
necessarily
it's like-
friends with the gay guys either. I mean,
Right,
okay, we're
there's-
getting off topic,
we're
but I
totally
will
getting
just
off
say
topic.
real
But-
quick. Okay.
It's totally reasonable to assume that another group may
Yeah.
try to also include themselves in there.
Sure, sure.
So
It's funny because in the Madness of Crowds, whatever Douglas Murray, he talks about that whole idea.
Yep.
It's an actually very interesting topic,
I
but
wonder if Dave Chappelle read Douglas Murray.
maybe. Shall I keep going?
Yeah,
Or do you
no,
want
I
to
guess
or
I
did
guess
you want to get back to?
I
the
guess what I just
point?
wanted to say was that right now we've got three major political worldviews. We've got the blue meme, which is, as we kind of talked about last night, mythic membership. Saved by the grace of Christ, or Allah is the one true God, etc. The glory of Rome,
Yeah.
my country. USA,
Right,
US. Like,
right.
this is the blue meme,
Yes.
right? They're just like, it's our team, and,
Yeah.
and there's a collectivist cohesion to it.
My country, right or wrong?
Yes. There's the blue meme. We know who those people are. It's a vast majority of
And a lot of them are good
Trump
people.
Yeah.
A lot of them.
This
I
is
know
the other
them.
thing. We have to so we have these three.
Yeah.
So the orange meme, then we've got the orange meme.
Yes.
Scientific materialists, not necessarily, but basically, rational libertarian types, classical liberals, business, free market economics.
Yeah.
These people, this is another whole kind of not as cohesive group
Sure.
because they're individualists and they kind of eschew being aligned with any particular group by and
Yeah.
large. They don't
Yeah.
like team sports.
Yeah.
And then there's the green meme, which kind of likes team sports, but in a very individualistic way.
Yeah.
The green meme kind of wears all of their different identities as like a bunch of team sports that they're individually a part of. So
Because, I mean,
right, so it's like
they're of the mind that like no ideology is better than another, except
got-
their ideology
except their
is better
ideology
than
is right,
it's like
yeah. It's like, oh, it's all perspectives. It's
Yeah.
like, yeah, but some perspectives are better than others.
Yeah.
Hold on there, you Nazi.
Although that
Like,
reminds
whoa,
me,
wait a minute, what's wrong with Nazi? It's like if you're the one claiming that there's no perspective better than another, then what's wrong? Why are you calling me a
Right.
Nazi? What's going on here? You're obviously thinking that there's something wrong with that one. So, and you're right.
Yeah.
So let's not pretend that all ideas are the same, right?
Right.
Let's not
or
pretend
that
that it's
they're all equal.
that they're all equal, or that there's no
equally
better than
valid or okay.
exactly. Like
Yes.
anyway, the point is, but the other point is, and it's well taken, the green meme, they've got a lot of good points. They recognize the systemic problems caused by industrialization, the economic and ecological problems that are caused by industrialization, that the kind of the kind of more rational materialists don't tend to see as clearly. They see things as like, well, we've got a factory, we make the things, it's got the inputs and the outputs, and there's these externalities, which are things like, oh yeah, these indigenous people are displaced downstream because of the pollution, and they've got no
Right.
defense against that.
Right.
Or there's the indigenous or the indigenous culture that's downstream that came up to the factory to start working in the factory. The indigenous culture is being demolished because they don't have the ability to pass down their culture in the same way that they used to, because they're just not living in the same kinds of environments, and they're not doing the same kinds of things, and they don't depend on the same kind of skills anymore. We're losing all that indigenous history.
Right.
It's a valid thing, but the orange meme would call it like an externality. Like, so the green meme notices all this thing,
Yeah.
all this, and they go, oh, this is a
Yeah.
problem too. So
They're very high in compassion.
very high in
and
compassion,
empathy.
and they're not
Well,
necessarily,
at least
not
for, at least
necessarily.
for the downtrodden, the people that they see as downtrodden, and
It can be very compassionate. It
there's
can
also the mean green meme,
yes,
which I'm
it
sure
can also
he
be
mentions at some
used
point.
as a form of showing how compassionate you are.
Right.
Which is and in that way to tear down other people is less compassionate, and it can be very mean that way. But
yeah.
but the point is that there are these three
Prevailing
worldviews
Yeah.
kind of are predominant in our current political climate, and none of them are terrible.
Right. They all have their pros and their cons.
Right. The
Yeah.
worldviews themselves are not terrible.
Yeah.
The ways that the ways that people choose to express these worldviews and the movements that might take root within those worldviews can be terrible. They can be absolutely terrible.
Yeah.
Like, the blue meme can be very kind.
Oh yeah.
It can be very kind and very generous and very like, yes, we're all brothers and sisters in Christ, and like,
Yeah.
this is, but they can also be Nazis.
Yeah.
Like, they can.
All of these memes have their pathological expressions, and I'm
Yes.
sure he goes into that at some point soon. I don't remember
So,
because
let's
it's
go-
been
yeah.
years since I've read it. So
Sorry, we're gonna go back to
Yeah.
reading the book like we're supposed to be. Sorry.
this is why many arguments are not really a matter of the better objective evidence, but of the subjective level of those arguing. No amount of orange scientific evidence will convince blue mythic believers. No amount of green bonding will impress orange aggressivism. No amount of turquoise holism will dislodge green pluralism. Unless the individual is ready to develop forward through the dynamic spiral of consciousness unfolding. This is why cross-level debates are rarely resolved, and all parties usually feel unheard and underappreciated. Or unappreciated, I should say. Likewise, nothing that can be said in this book will convince you that a theory of everything is possible, unless you already have a touch of turquoise coloring your cognitive palette, and then you will think on many a page, I already knew that. I just didn't know how to articulate it. As we were saying, first-tier memes generally resist the emergence of second-tier memes. Scientific materialism, orange, is aggressively reductionistic towards second-tier constructs, attempting to reduce all interior stages to objective neuronal fireworks. Mythic fundamentalism, blue, is often outraged at what it sees as attempts to unseat its given order. Egocentrism, red, ignores second tier altogether. Magic, purple, puts a hex on it. Green accuses second tier consciousness of being authoritarian, rigidly hierarchical, patriarchal, marginalizing, oppressive, racist, and sexist. Green has been in charge
Oh, hold on a second. Because green also says that same thing about
blue,
like,
for sure.
about blue and orange,
Yeah.
both, right? Like, that's like, it's not just. So I want to like, green makes those criticisms and makes them accurately about some people.
Well, yeah, sure.
about a lot of people, actually. Like, okay, well, that's patriarchy.
But then
or that's-
unaccurately about a lot of people as well.
right, and they're uncharitable with those accusations
Sure.
as well. Like, So that's the important distinction there.
Yeah.
And this is where the problem is with the green meme currently, is that while they are right that the blue meme is patriarchal
Yeah.
and kind of
And a bit ethnocentric.
and
tend to
ethnocentric,
be.
they're patriarchal and ethnocentric for sure. They don't see any value in any of that, right? And there is value in that, right? Like, although if you allow green to define patriarchal, there's no value in that, but there is value in how the blue meme is if you allow them to define themselves.
Yeah.
So it's not clear that what the green meme defines as patriarchal is necessarily
Based in reality.
bad.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Although they focus on the bad parts of it,
Of
right?
course.
That's what I'm saying. Is like
Yeah.
all these, and it's true for the orange and the blue. They're all uncharitable in their assessment of the other. Thank you.
Yeah, I was thinking that too. Green has been in charge of cultural studies for the past 3 decades. You will probably already have recognized many of the standard catchwords of the green meme: pluralism, relativism, diversity, multiculturalism, deconstruction, anti-hierarchy, and so on. And so he said that we're in the cultural studies in charge of for the past 3 decades. So now it's been like 5 decades since he wrote this.
Yeah, he was talking about since the 70s.
On the one hand, the pluralistic relativism of Green has nobly enlarged the canon of cultural studies to include many previously marginalized people, ideas, and narratives.
Yes.
It has acted with sensitivity and care in attempting to redress social imbalances and avoid exclusionary practices.
Yes.
It has been responsible for basic initiatives in civil rights and environmental protection.
Yep.
It has developed strong and often convincing critiques of the philosophies, metaphysics, and social practices of the conventional religious, blue, and scientific, orange memes, with their often exclusionary, patriarchal, sexist, and colonialistic agendas.
All of that is true.
On the other hand, as effective as these critiques of pre-Green stages have been, Green has attempted to turn its guns on all post-Green stages as well, with the most unfortunate results. This has made it very difficult and often impossible for Green to move forward into more holistic, integral constructions. Because pluralistic relativism, Green, moves beyond mythic absolutisms, blue, and formal rationality, orange, into richly textured and individualistic contexts, one of its defining characteristics is its strong subjectivism. This means that its sanctions for truth and goodness are established largely by individual preferences, as long as the individual is not harming others.
Right. And this is why some people, this is where that weird kind of like the idea that there's this weird kind of blurring of the individual and the collective kind of thing, where it's like the individual wears all of their collective identities as a bunch of like uniform badges kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's also, well, I'd also like to point out that in a way, I think that, and I think Wilbur would actually agree with this, but it's not just that the problem isn't just that the critiques of Green are pointed at the post-Green, right? It's also a problem that the critiques of Green and of orange and of blue pointed backwards against blue, pointing backwards against red, or orange pointing backwards against blue, or green pointing backwards against orange, are deeply uncharitable and completely unwilling to recognize any value. And this is what he's talking about when he says we have this weird autoimmune disease where every worldview thinks their worldview is the only worldview and the only valuable worldview.
Yeah.
And the real problem is not so much that Green is turning its guns on post-green waves of consciousness evolution. That's
Yeah.
not the issue. The issue is that, because that's to be expected from all the first tier memes,
Right.
that the issue is that we're too uncharitable within those worldviews, and about opposing worldviews.
Yeah.
And
Can't see the
and-
benefits of
yeah,
them.
and so we for one, because we don't see this, most people don't see this as developmental
Yeah.
worldview, like a developmental hierarchy of worldviews.
Yeah.
Because most people don't want to see it that way, because it's very easy to say, well, okay, well, this is saying that I'm at blue and therefore
I'm not like
I'm
that
not-
evolved or
right?
something.
Like,
yeah.
you know, it's very easy to see this as like saying like I'm less than, right?
Yeah.
It's not.
No.
Or maybe it is, but it's weird because it's not that rigid. Like human beings aren't reducible to a meme.
Right. Well, he even talks about that.
Yeah.
It's not like you're, just one meme necessarily. You might predominantly think in a green manner, but maybe there's some aspects of orange that color your thinking as well.
The other thing is that a lot of people who, so I don't think he gets into it in this book, but it's true that you can generally come from and act from in the world from from like blue, for example.
Yeah.
But you can be an integral thinker.
Mm-hmm.
You can be a green meme thinker. You can be like a postmodern. Like, okay, here's a people have called Thaddeus Russell right wing because he, kind of goes against the SJW call out culture stuff.
Is he a postmodernist?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Right?
But he's not into a lot of the same
Well,
ideas.
he's into all of the postmodern stuff.
Okay.
For sure. But
Yeah.
like he's just not like he doesn't think that critical race theory is the same thing. Like he doesn't think that right, like he doesn't recognize that as valid postmodernism. And he doesn't think that these kinds of weird outrage culture mobs are the same thing.
Right.
I see them as kind of a direct result of that
thinking,
that way of, that kind of relativist thinking in society, and kind of undergirding like all the it basically takes all of the direction out of rationality, and kind of now all of a sudden you can just rationalize everything. So and then people, these kinds of panics and moral outrages can bubble up. But anyway, the point is he's definitely a very, it's not like he's I guess the point is that you can have very high level cognitive capacity and decide that you are decide that you're going to live your life as a Christian and come from a blue meme point of, kind of like, this is where you can do that. And like you get like, brilliant people throughout history, like Thomas Aquinas or something like this, who are like clearly not like, well, just God is right. Like they were like, really like deeply
highly intelligent.
highly
This is
intelligent.
not to say that if you're like a Christian or you follow a certain religion that you're just stuck at blue and like once you move beyond blue you're not going to be a Christian anymore. That doesn't necessarily mean that.
It's not the truth at all.
Some people move to orange and they become atheists, but that's not always the case.
A lot of people do. A lot of people go. There's green meme expressions of religion. There's integral expressions of religion. It doesn't. Anyway, please.
All right. On the other hand, as effective as these critiques of pre-green stages have been, Green has attempted to turn its guns on all post-green stages as well, with the most unfortunate results. This has made it very difficult and often impossible for Green to move forward into more holistic, integral constructions. Because pluralistic relativism, Green, moves, and I might have read a couple of these sentences already, but Because pluralistic relativism, green, moves beyond mythic absolutisms, blue, and formal rationality, orange, into richly textured and individualistic context, one of its defining characteristics is its strong subjectivism. This means that its sanction for truth and goodness are established largely by individual preferences, as long as the individual is not harming others. Right, we did read that. What is true for you is not necessarily true for me. What is right is simply what individuals or cultures happen to agree on at any given moment. There are no universal claims for knowledge or truth. Each person is free to find his or her own values, which are not binding on anybody else. You do your thing, I do mine, is a popular summary of this stance. This is why the self at this stage is indeed the sensitive self. Precisely because it is aware of the many different contexts and numerous different types of truth, pluralism, it bends over backwards in an attempt to let each truth have its own say, without marginalizing or belittling any. As with the catchwords anti-hierarchy, pluralism, relativism, and egalitarianism, whenever you hear the word marginalization and a criticism of it, you are almost always in the presence of a green meme. This noble intent, of course, has its downside. Meetings that are run on green principles tend to follow a similar course. Everybody is allowed to express his or her feelings, which often takes hours. There is an almost interminable processing of opinions, often reaching no decision or course of action, since a specific course of action would likely exclude somebody. Thus, there are often calls for an inclusionary, non-marginalizing, compassionate embrace of all views, but exactly how to do this is rarely spelled out, since in reality, not all views are of equal merit.
Now, this is also not... this is not as bad, like his kind of... What he's pointing out is kind of a flaw right now. I don't think that's actually a pathological expression.
I don't know if he's saying... I mean, it can go that way, though. You know, if nothing can ever get done or accomplished, because...
That's fine. No, this is I think I mean, yes, it's not the best way to run. However, I think it's actually the right thing for the green meme. That's what that's what the green meme should do. It should endlessly deliberate. It's more, and this is because I don't think that it should be...
Well, they're obviously not doing that right now.
No, because the green meme has in the modern political landscape, the green meme has betrayed its own sensibilities. And this is why Thaddeus Russell argues that the social justice warriors aren't really postmodernists. Right? He's like they're not willing to deconstruct.
Yeah.
They're not willing to deconstruct race, and it's like they're not willing to deconstruct race because race is useful for political ends, and so they're just nakedly reaching for power, and they've decided because that they're not going to deconstruct, that race is not deconstructible. Whiteness is a real thing. Blackness is real. Right? And the whole green meme, postmodernist project is to question the reality of these narratives. Blackness is a meta-narrative. Whiteness is a meta-narrative. It's like it's an overarching story about what it means to be white. And the intersectional approach, the social justice approach, is to treat that meta-narrative as if it's real, not to interrogate its realness. Right? And so if you're interrogating the realness of something, that's fine. Is this really true that whiteness is a real thing? That's a postmodern question.
Yeah.
Right?
But they're not doing this?
They're not doing that. They're saying whiteness is real and it affects people in these ways and it's political and we have to fight against it, we have to tear it down, we have to restructure society because of it. And so the postmodern left is pathological because it's betrayed its postmodern sensibilities. Anyway,
That's another topic for another time, because, yeah, I'm sure we could go on that for a while. Thus, there are often calls for an inclusionary, non-marginalizing, compassionate embrace of all views. But exactly how to do this is rarely spelled out, since in reality not all views are of equal merit. The meeting is considered a success, not if a conclusion is reached, but if everybody has a chance to share their feelings. Since no view is supposed to be inherently better than another, no real course of action can be recommended, other than sharing all views. If any statements are made with certainty, it is how oppressive and nasty all the alternative conceptions are. There was a saying common in the 60s, freedom is an endless meeting. Well, the endless part was certainly right. In academia, the pluralistic relativism is the dominant stance. As Colin McGinn summarizes it, according to this conception, human reason is inherently local, culture relative, rooted in the variable facts of human nature and history, a matter of divergent practices and forms of life and frames of reference and conceptual schemes. There are no norms of reasoning that transcend what is accepted by a society or an epoch, no objective justifications for belief that everyone must respect on pain of cognitive malfunction. To be valid, it is to be taken to be valid, and different people can have legitimately different patterns of taking. In the end, the only justifications for belief have the form justified for me. As Claire Graves put it, this system sees the world relativistically. Thinking shows an almost radical, almost compulsive emphasis on seeing everything from a relativistic, subjective frame of reference. The point is perhaps obvious. Because pluralistic relativism has such an intensely subjectivistic stance, it is especially prey to narcissism. And exactly that is the crux of the problem. Pluralism becomes a supermagnet for narcissism. Pluralism becomes an unwitting home for the culture of narcissism, and narcissism is the great destroyer of any integral culture in general, and a theory of everything in particular, because narcissism refuses to step outside of its own subjective orbit, and hence it cannot allow truths other than its own. Thus, on our list of obstacles to a genuine theory of everything, we might list the culture of narcissism. And this is where boomeritis enters the picture. Do we want to keep going, or do you want to end for the night?
Oh, I don't know. Let's see. We've got a little bit of time. Should I read some boomeritis?
Sure.
Okay. Chapter 2, boomeritis. Starts with a definition. Bore. A person of low taste, more interested in himself than in me. Anyway, and that's a quote by Ambrose Bierce, I'm going to say. I don't know the name.
Yeah.
Anyway, the dictionary definition of narcissism is, quote, excessive interest in one's own self, importance, abilities, etc. Egocentrism. End quote. Yet narcissism is not simply the overvaluing of the self and its abilities, but a concomitant sorry, I've been drinking whiskey.
Oh, no.
A concomitant undervaluing of others and their contributions. It is not simply possessing a large amount of self-esteem. It is the simultaneous devaluation of others that is crucial. The inner state of narcissism, clinicians tell us, is often that of an empty or fragmented self, attempting to fill the void with an egocentric grasping that inflates the self while deflating others. The emotional mood is, nobody tells me what to do. Most psychologists agree that, although there are many ways to look at narcissism, and many different types of narcissism, it is, in general, a normal trait of childhood that is ideally outgrown, at least to a significant degree. Development, in fact, can be defined as a successive decrease in egocentrism. That's an interesting point. Good to note. Human development in general, individual development, psychological development, can be defined as a successive decrease in egocentrism, or successive decreases in egocentrism. The young infant is largely wrapped up in its own world, oblivious to much of its surroundings and most human interactions. As its consciousness increasingly grows in strength and capacity, it can become aware of itself and of others, and eventually put itself in others' shoes, and thus develop care, compassion, and a generous, integral embrace, none of which it is born with. As Harvard, new kind of subheading, development is a declining egocentrism. As Harvard developmental psychologist Howard Gardner reminds us, the young child is totally egocentric, meaning not that he thinks selfishly only about himself, but to the contrary, that he is incapable of thinking about himself. The egocentric child is unable to differentiate himself from the rest of the world, is not separated himself out from others or from objects, thus feels that others share his pain or his pleasure, that his mumblings will inevitably be understood, that his perspective is shared by all persons, and that even animals and plants partake of his consciousness. In playing hide and seek, he will hide in broad view of other persons because his egocentrism prevents him from recognizing that others are aware of his location. The whole course of human development can be viewed as a continuing decline in egocentrism. Okay, and that's the end of Howard Gardner's quote. Thus, development, for the most part, involves decreasing narcissism and increasing consciousness, or the ability to take other people, places, and things into account, and thus increasingly extend care to each. Carol Gilligan found, for example, that female moral development tends to go through 3 general stages, which she calls selfish, care, and universal care. In each of these stages, the circle of care and compassion expands and egocentrism declines. At first, the young girl cares mostly for herself. Then she can care for others as well, such as her family and friends. And finally, she can extend her concern and well wishes to humanity as a whole, and thus move toward an integral embrace. Each higher stage does not mean that you stop caring for yourself, only that you include more and more others for whom you also evidence a genuine concern and compassion. Incidentally, males go through the same 3 general stages, although according to Gilligan, they usually emphasize rights and justice more than care and relationships. Gilligan believes that after a 3rd stage, in both sexes, there can be an integration of the contrasexual attitude, so that at the universal integral stage, both men and women integrate the male and female voices in themselves to a large degree, thus uniting justice and compassion. This integral embrace is a type of culmination of the 3rd general stage of universal care. I will correlate this with other conceptions, such as spiral dynamics, in a moment. Those 3 general stages are quite common for most forms of development. They are known by many names, such as pre-conventional, conventional, post-conventional, or egocentric, sociocentric, and world-centric, me, us, and all of us. The selfish stage is also called pre-conventional because the infant and young child have not yet learned conventional rules and roles. They have not yet been socialized. They cannot take the role of others and thus begin to develop genuine care and compassion. They therefore remain egocentric, selfish, narcissistic, and so on. This does not mean that young children have no feelings for others, nor does it mean that they are altogether amoral. It simply means that compared with subsequent development, their feelings and morals are still heavily centered on their own impulses, physiological needs, and instinctual discharges. Although some romantic theorists believe that the infant exists in a state of non-dual freedom and original goodness, what baby is truly free? At most, it appears that the infantile state is one of potentiality and openness, not an actual presence of freedom, since any state dominated by impulses, hunger, tension, and discharge cannot be truly free. In any event, studies consistently show that the infant cannot take the role of other and thus is not capable of genuine compassion, care, or love. Starting around age 6 or 7, a profound shift in consciousness occurs. The child can begin to take the role of other. For example, say you have a book whose front cover is blue and whose back cover is orange. Show the book front and back to a 5-year-old child, then hold the book between you and the child. You're looking at the orange cover side, the child looking at the blue. Ask the child what color he is seeing, he will correctly say blue. Ask the child what color you are seeing, and he will say blue. A 7-year-old will say orange. In other words, the 5-year-old cannot put himself in your shoes and take your point of view. He does not have the cognitive capacity to step outside of his own skin and inhabit yours for a while. And therefore, he will never really understand your perspective, will never really understand you, and there will never be a mutual recognition. Nor can he therefore truly genuinely care for your point of view, however much he may emotionally love you. But all of that begins to change with the emergence of the capacity to take the role of others. Which is why Gilligan calls this stage the shift from selfish to care. The care stage, which generally lasts from 7 to adolescence, is known as conventional, conformist, ethnocentric, or sociocentric, and it means just that, centered on the group, family, peers, tribe, nation. The young child steps outside of his or her own limited perspectives and begins to share the views and perspectives of others, so much so that the child is often trapped in the views of others, hence conformist. This stage is often called good boy, nice girl, my country, right or wrong, and so on. Reflecting the intense conformity, peer pressure, and group dominance that usually accompanies this general period. Okay. Although the individual at this stage can, to some degree, step aside from her own perspective, she cannot easily step aside from the group's. She has moved from me to us. A great decline in egocentrism, but there she is stuck, my country, right or wrong. And of course, this, I'm going to stop for a second and say that my country in that moment speaks to, more like in adolescence, it's like my tribe. It's like, okay, well, this is what my friends think and my parents are dumb. It's my in group. Whatever that in group might be.
It could include the parents, though, right?
Could include the parents, depending on the degree of rebellion in the child. But it's more of a the in group is we're bouncing everything off our in group, and our in group is, we just kind of say the in group is right about everything. It's very collectivist. It's very kind of like, my country, right or wrong. But if the in group happens to be, not interested in the country at all, but very interested in some team or sports something, then that's the thing.
Right.
It's whatever the in-group thinks. So that can be displaced on all sorts of in-group conformity. And I'd also like to point out that, and I don't think that Wilber does a great job of making this point explicit in a lot of his work, at least not in the easier work. And maybe that's valuable because it's supposed to be easier. But it doesn't make it very explicit that the systems that are in place in a culture help to escalate people to these stages of worldview development. So culture works very hard to put bones in place to create a new culture in which it's easier for people to attain that level of worldview. And then they repress any systems that make it easier for people to transcend that worldview, right? So the blue meme, for a very long time, worked very hard to repress ideas that minimize the importance of God
Right.
in the state,
Right.
for sure. But, you know, I mean, witch burnings and all of that, right? Galileo being burnt at the stake, you know, that,
Yeah.
hey, look, the
Right.
sun goes around, you know, the sun doesn't go around the earth goes around the sun. Burn the witch, you know? So, but it's also obvious that the blue meme, when it was the dominant socio-political, cultural force in the world at the time, built a whole ton of churches and monasteries and libraries and stuff like this
Yeah.
that helped the world achieve that level of
Right.
worldview,
To get to that level.
right? And it should also be noted that it was a step forward from warlords, from roving warlords who were in the red meme, who were just kind of building a castle in the countryside and then declaring that they were your lord.
Right. Well,
Like
maybe
these
not even
feudalist-
building, maybe taking over
Yeah,
a
just
castle.
taking
in the
over a castle, right?
countryside.
So, and you know, it's all brute force.
Yeah.
So it was a step forward to say that
Right.
there is one true God and one true right way to live,
Yeah.
and that we should all be subject to the same
Although,
morals.
obviously, they had their pathological
They
expressions.
definitely
with,
did. They definitely did. But it was a
hangings
step.
and,
But
yeah.
it was a broader embrace. It was
Right.
it was a
Right.
step forward from what lay before it.
Right.
Progress
And then,
is real.
was it like the Enlightenment that started to bring forth the orange?
Right.
meme?
And yes, and the
Yeah.
orange and the blue meme definitely fought against the instantiation of the orange meme in culture and
Right.
in systems. But then
Right.
once we started to have things like public education, we started to have the Industrial Revolution for sure, and started to kind of provide people with evidence. Hey, look, science works, right? It's like, hey, guess what? You don't have to like have a candle in your house because you can have a light bulb.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, orange meme, the science stuff, it works.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, these
And
kind
it's
of like
beneficial.
this orange meme, this, you know, the revolution of reason, you know, as it starts to become kind of widespread and instantiated in culture, it helps the fact of the widespread instantiation in culture helps people to achieve that level of worldview.
Yes.
They still have to go through
Yeah.
the other
Yeah,
the
you
other
can't skip- yeah.
these stages. You still have to go through this kind of like
Yeah.
ethnocentric stage where it's like your group is the right group, you know, but it allows people to attain the evidence that is there allows people to attain that more easily. So as these memes proliferate and instantiate themselves successfully in society, which I'm happy to see a successful instantiation of the green meme in our society, because a successful instantiation of the green meme in society would be balanced on and kind of undergirded by the healthy expressions of blue and orange that preceded it. And then we would have more people who are more compassionate and aware of systems of oppression and stuff like this. It'd be fine.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that.
As long as the pathological expression of green is not allowed to flourish.
Well, the pathological expression of green will absolutely dissolve the advances of orange and blue.
Yeah. Well, and this is why, I mean, they're fighting against it so hard.
Yeah,
And,
and
like,
that's why we end up with the red meme kind of mobs in the street
yeah.
that are, you know, tearing things down, and it's all about power.
Yeah.
Because that's the red meme. It's all about power. That's the real danger of the pathological expression of green. Anyway,
And they, like, hang on the like, coattails of green.
Yes,
They kind of pretend
yes.
like they are
they pretend
part
that
of
they're green. They pretend that they're compassionate, but they're really
Yeah.
just trying to flip the table.
Yeah.
They just want power.
Yeah.
So anyway, all of which, and you know, some of that is, you know, well, anyway,
That's another conversation.
that's a whole other conversation.
maybe.
All of which begins to change in adolescence. So the green, the blue meme stuck in convention begins to change in adolescence, theoretically, with the emergence of post-conventional and world-centric awareness.
Gillian's universal care. This is yet another major decline in egocentrism, because this time one's peer group is subjected to scrutiny. What is right and fair, not just for me or for my tribe or my nation, but for all people, regardless of race, religion, sex, or creed. The adolescent can become a fiery idealist, ablaze with the possibilities, a crusader for justice, a revolutionary out to rock the world. Of course, some of this is just an explosion of hormones, frenzied at best. But a good part of it is the emergence of the stage of universal care, justice, and fairness. And, in fact, this is simply the beginning of the possibility of developing a truly integral embrace. So the next section is a spiral of compassion. Maybe that's a good place to stop.
Okay.
Because I'm starting to lose my voice. And
Yeah, it's getting late.
maybe next time we do this, I won't be drinking.
Maybe best.
So,
Thanks for listening.
is that good enough for tonight?
Yeah.
All right, we'll get out of here.